Welcome back to the Ask a Mask podcast. This is your host, Ava Lown Smith, class of 21 from Beloit, Wisconsin. Today we're joined by some special guests, Beloit College students. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, round of applause. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is William Pickering. I'm a junior here. I'm a psychology major at Beloit College, and I'm from Fox River Grove, Illinois, which is about an hour northwest of Chicago.
Welcome.
My name is Linga Badasti. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior here at Beloit College, and I'm studying biochemistry and literary studies. I'm from Manila, Guam.
My name is MJ. I am a junior here at Beloit. I am a sophomore here at Beloit College. I am majoring in engineering, and I am from Tyler, Texas.
So these are our wonderful guests. Thank you for joining me, everybody, taking the time out of your Zoom university to join us on this fine evening. Today we're going to be answering some more questions. Just like the last podcast, we're just going to carry it forward, answer some more fan questions submitted by our maskers. To the three of you, that's our fan name for all of our fans that are listening right now. I'm talking about you guys right there listening. Yep, the maskers. All right, so the first question is, where were you when COVID first became a national issue?
So I guess I'll go first. The pandemic really it came on kind of slowly. When the year started, you kind of heard about it more and more. When it really I guess hit and it really started affecting people in this area is when the college announced that it wasn't going to come back for the fall 2020 term. At least not in person, and so they decided they were gonna cut off the spring 2019 term early and then continue the fall term through classes or through Zoom classes. And I was actually on campus, unlike a lot of people, during that spring break. And they just sort of announced yep, so you're kind of on your own now. It was actually kind of a bit better to be on campus because you didn't actually have to go back to get all your stuff. But it was just sort of a weird atmosphere where almost everybody was gone. And there was a sense of all right, well, in the next week, this campus is going to become a ghost town. And everyone was just scrambling. So, yeah, that's where I was.
For clarification, William meant the spring 2020 term.
I did mean the spring 2020 term.
Well, for me, I actually, for that spring break, I actually decided for once to go see family for spring break. So I ended up going to Tennessee when that COVID thing ended up going on. I didn't know it was going to outbreak like that at that time. I was honestly just trying to go see family. Crazy thing about it was I made it a trip for me and my girlfriend to go see family. So that kind of it was a whole bunch of craziness going on at that time. So people started catching it in Tennessee, which kind of freaked everybody out. And we started getting emails about how everything was starting to get canceled and things like that. So when it was time to come back, it was outrageous for me because I had to come back to school and I had to take my girl home. I had to have her get all her stuff, then take her home, then come back to campus. So keep in mind, I had to drive from Tennessee back, take her home, then come back to campus, pack all my stuff up. I stayed another 2 days to continue packing my stuff up. And during all this, there was no one around. It was completely ghosted. It was just me. So it kind of creeped me out a little bit. But then again, it was peaceful. It was just me. Didn't have anything to worry about. But other than that, that's how that went for me.
When we first got the email that the school was shutting down for COVID, I was in Portland, Oregon, visiting some friends. And Portland at that time was a hot spot, Portland and Seattle, so that's where I was. But I never wore a mask there, and no one else was wearing a mask. So it was just normal life. So I flew back home, or I flew back to Beloit to the campus so I could pack up all my stuff and put it into storage. And I was here for maybe 4 days doing that. And then I decided with my family that I was just going to fly back home to Guam. And so I traveled 30 hours from Chicago to Guam. And I took 3 flights. So I took a flight from Chicago to Texas, Texas to Hawaii, and then Hawaii to Guam. And then I just stayed back home.
Wow, so it seems like everybody was away from their homes. I had a very similar experience. I was in North Carolina for indoor nationals, did my day of warm-ups, found out after warm-ups that the people were going to be packing up and leaving from campus. Indoor nationals got canceled, came back to campus, and packed my stuff up. Thankfully, I'm from Beloit, Wisconsin, though, so it was a very easy pack-up situation for me, not that difficult. And I actually didn't do it until 2 weeks after I got back to Beloit. So, yes. Okay, so next question from a masker. Did you break quarantine for any reason? And what was that reason, if you don't mind sharing?
I can go first for this one. When I flew back home, I was put into a strict quarantine for 2 weeks. I was not allowed to leave a bedroom in my house, and they placed meals outside my door, and the only time I could leave was to go to the bathroom. So I did that for 2 whole weeks. And then the restrictions in Guam weren't that bad, so I was able to probably do more things than people in the United States could. But my first quarantine, I did not break it.
I personally, I I don't know if I'd count it just because, when I was a kid, I only really hung out with people outdoors because my parents never really let me have people over. So there wasn't much of a difference. I didn't really hang out with many people, at my home anyway. It was only 1 or 2 people, that I really hung out with. And those were all outside and socially distanced. So yes and no. I wasn't in my home, but I was being very careful.
I didn't really break quarantine. I didn't really break quarantine until I got a job. I mean, but other than that, I live out in the country area, so I really didn't have anyone to go see or anything like that. So basically, if I didn't have work, I would be at home most of the time. So I didn't really leave the house that much unless it was for more important reasons.
So for me, I had an informal quarantine. I'm just lonely, so I was in my room a lot. And I spent 2 weeks alone in my room, basically. But I broke through the course of the many months that we've been in quarantine. I broke that technically kind of social distance quarantine when I went protesting in Milwaukee and Madison, and then also in Beloit. Fortunately, everybody was wearing masks. People were dispensing hand sanitizer, and people were trying their best to stay separate from other groups. So if you came with a group, you were with that group, but then you weren't going and socializing with other groups of people that were protesting in the larger group. Moving on to the next question. MJ kind of got started on this, but what were all of y'all's working experiences during this pandemic?
I guess I'll go, just because I wasn't sure if I should add this to the last question because I did work. I worked 2 jobs. In the mornings, I worked at McDonald's, and in the night times, I would close at Jewel Osco, which is, if you don't live in the area, it's a grocery store. I there's a lot of like things to go over, but I guess just in my area, the people did like follow guidelines pretty well. There were like a few Karens that didn't want to wear masks and would complain about it, but we would just sort of ignore them and wait for them to leave. Like we didn't even want to argue with them. Um, and the coworkers like broke quarantine constantly, because I guess it was just because there was a sense of like you can't, like you're working with each other. There's no way that you're gonna like be able to socially distance, at least in the departments. So there would only be like 4 or 5 people I'd be interacting with, but yeah, within those people.
For me, I only had one job. It's the same job I had before I came. I just went back to it. I was a assistant manager at Domino's, so that that one was kind of, there were a lot of Karens. Let's just put it like that. There were a lot, but I had the choice whether or not to lock my lobby and things like that. But like, I got generous at first, but people would start walking in with no mask at all, even though there were signs on the door. So I just started locking my lobby like every single day when I would open and even close, things like that. I had a lot of people on the job that would break quarantine. People who'd have their mask down here while making food. So I had that issue a lot. I don't know what it was. Like no one could keep their mask on their freaking face for some reason. But other than that, that was me for my job. So
I didn't have a job over the summer, but I did volunteer at the local public health lab. And, you know, it's a public health lab during a pandemic, so I feel like all regulations were followed. Yeah.
Nice. I was working through Beloit College remotely for the archives. So me and Fred were buddy-buddy. So thankfully, I was in a position where I didn't have to interact with people and contact people and be around people that were not wearing their masks properly or were breaking the rules and guidelines. How did your country respond to COVID, and was it different than medical opinion? And since we have somebody from Guam, I think it would be interesting if Lincoln answered first, and then maybe if only one of us answered for the US. So Lincoln, take it away.
Yeah. In the beginning, well, Guam right now is experiencing high numbers of cases, but in March and throughout the summer, our case numbers were really low, less than 300 total cases by the time I left in August. The administration took it very seriously, and they received federal assistance to bring in test kits to the island and also purchase hotel rooms where they had people who were flying in from different places in the world to quarantine. Everyone had to do mandatory quarantine. If you were a resident, you could quarantine at your house or your household resident, but you had to sign an agreement. And if you didn't have a place to properly quarantine at, or you were like a visitor, you had to quarantine in one of the hotels for 14 days. They did start doing protocols where people could test out of quarantine. So if you came from a specific area that was considered low risk, you could test out of quarantine 7 days into it. And then if you came from a high risk area, it was 10 days you could test out. They did a lot of asymptomatic testing. So I was able to get tested 3 times while I was back home. And that's because the government did outreaches, they called it, where they would set up testing sites in one of the villages, and from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., people could just either drive through their cars or do walk-up sessions and just get tested. No, free of charge. You didn't have to have insurance. All you had to do was have an ID. Some businesses were closed for a while, but then they started opening it back up with mask requirements, of course, and social distancing requirements. And then our governor would do press conferences with medical professionals to alert the community about updates on coronavirus.
So which one of the three of us wants to talk about U.S. reaction to COVID?
It's kind of a hard question because like it's all over the place. Like, so the man in charge, the head honcho, he's like doing nothing to help. In fact, he's been detrimental. There was this whole like system that they were gonna mail a mask to every citizen, and Trump just blocked it. Like, it was fully funded. There was nothing he had to do. If he had done nothing, it would have gone through, and he blocked it. So the response in our country has been like very like, the federal position has just been like, do nothing, reopen everything because they want the economy to come back. That's not going to happen, even if it does. Like, even if the pandemic is over. But and then like it depends on like which county, which state you're in. Like some states, some areas have really strict guidelines, and some just don't really have any at all.
Basically, the U.S. is incompetent, but we all knew that already.
Oh, there we go.
No, go ahead.
That's like one of the weird things about like these responses is that like it's not just like governmental responses. It's just like people actually have to like follow the guidelines, and like we're just like one of like the weird countries that like has a huge anti-mask population. Like, so it's just like a huge thing to factor in.
Right, because it's pro-choice until it's a woman's choice, basically. How long do you think that the U.S. will be in quarantine for? Because I feel like we're never going to get out of it until a vaccine is produced. But I don't know what y'all think is going to happen with the U.S. and COVID.
I mean, I don't think we'll ever be out of this pandemic. COVID is going to be here for a very long time. It'll probably become the new flu. But until we get a proper system in place to control it and or get a vaccine, we'll always just be in it. I think the new norm is wearing a mask and staying as far apart from people as possible, and getting tested regularly.
Well, thanks for joining the podcast, our beautiful guests from all parts of campus, in their rooms, in other rooms, just all over the place. Thanks for tuning in to the Ask a Mask podcast. And this has been your host, Ava, and our guest,
William. Thank you for having me.
Lincoln, nice to meet y'all.
Thank y'all for having me as well.
Awesome. We'll see you next week.